All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be talking to you today. It is a Tuesday. It's an Arlen Tuesday, and Arlen had a little bit of trouble. I was trying to share the video with the Halitics Facebook page, and I was able to do it. But that's why we started with that counter at 0 or below. I try to always get on before the counter hits 0, but I don't always succeed. How you doing today?
I'm doing just fine. I mean, the weather's been really good lately. It's been kind of warm, warmer than usual, just like it was last week, but that's all fine. But when I turn on the news, that's what gives me anxiety because there are just so many bad things going on. I just wonder, who's running the country and what are we doing?
Well, we've got we know who's running the country. If you watch out, if you've been listening to Halitics, if you've been listening to my radio station, it's billionaires. Yeah. It's the wealthiest. It's the worst. It's the cockistocracy. That's what we live in. And tragically, that's not changing despite all my efforts, Arlen, to make change. We do see change, but it tends to be change for the worst. Before we get into, we got a lot of topics. And you mentioned, Arlen, that last week we had a good response, right? The Halitics got pretty good numbers, surprisingly good for I shouldn't even say that. They were good. We were pleased. I decided to do something the same as I did last week for our show. That is, and I hope I don't see the numbers popping up again. Maybe. No, they don't. Good. So the 3 panels. Yes, the last week I had a 3-panel thumbnail is what we call these. That's what the kind of promotional image is for YouTube. And again, the 3 panels. We've got the RIP local radio that relates to a Santa Cruz radio station that is for sale yet again. But there's bad news for radio for sure. We'll talk about that. The costly and murderous wars that the U.S. is involved in, courtesy of your favorite New York Times columnist. I think he's your favorite, Nick Kristof, also voting rights under attack. So you said bad news. Those all look pretty bad to me. Radio dying, war thriving, voting. Yeah, we're not sure how much we can vote.
What I think is happening is, Trump is seemingly in charge, telling the rest of the country what we're going to do. And I don't think there's anybody to stop him. Nobody's going to say, wait, that's not a good idea. This is not good. So almost everything he does kind of backfires and makes things worse. And the Republicans just kind of, sit there. I guess they're just afraid they can't cross him or he's going to primary them. And so he gets to do pretty much whatever he wants to do. And I don't know who he's listening to, or maybe he's just listening to himself. Hard to say, but the decisions he makes are not good ones.
Well, according to James Carville, the Democrats should be doing what they are doing, I guess, is sitting on their hands, letting Trump do what he will because it's good for them politically. So do you feel like the Democrats could be doing something different? Certainly, there have been a few votes that were for example, let me just throw this at you, Arlen. The nominee to replace Kristi Noem at Department of Homeland Security, Mark Wayne Mullins, was confirmed, but only because I believe two Democrats, Fetterman and one other, crossed over to vote for him. Is Chuck Schumer doing enough to keep his caucus in line? Or, what's going on here? What kind of a party is it if they can't enforce any unity?
I don't know if Schumer has the power to, change people's minds. I don't think he can change Fetterman's mind on anything. Fetterman seems to be becoming a Republican and, voting with the Republicans just about on everything. So there's, Trump is doing all these things, but who's going to tell them they're not working when they aren't working?
Yeah, well, hopefully the voters will, but he wants to keep, it certainly would appear his promoting this SAVE Act, which we'll talk about in a bit, does not appear likely to pass. He's promoting it. I guess he thinks he's hoping maybe, it's the best I can come up with, that he'll prevent enough people from voting legally, right? Citizens, people who register to vote. He's hoping the SAVE Act will keep enough of them from casting their ballots that he could still win. I think this, even if it passes, it's very likely to backfire. We can talk about that. But do you think that's his motivation, keep legal voters from voting?
Absolutely. I mean, if he sees, he could read opinion polls. If he could see that Republicans are losing every off-year election and the Democrats are doing well, and his popularity and his disapproval rating is getting higher, then he's not going to just sit there and not do anything. He's got to figure out a way to change that. And by the way, you also mentioned, what should the Democrats be doing? And yeah, they should be definitely pushing back on Trump and criticizing him and all that. But you would probably agree with me that they also need to put some things forward, some positive things that they will do that the Republicans won't do. Things like health care and helping more working people. So
Well, you're talking
yeah, I
my
think it's a little
language,
bit of
Arlen.
both.
I've been saying that for decades too. No question about it. They need to present a positive alternative to MAGA. And I think there have been fitful efforts to do that, but they haven't been nearly as well organized as they should be. And the party doesn't amplify them for a variety of reasons. By the way, the other Democrat who voted for Mark Wayne Mullen to be confirmed is, and by the way, I had to check his name. He has an interesting name. Like he said, Mullen or Mullins. I always get these things confused, but it's Mullen singular. And his
With the two
first name,
names.
it's not Mark Wayne Mullen. It's Mark Wayne Mullen. His just
Right.
one name.
Yeah, all one word.
Which is kind of interesting that you would do that. I've never seen that before. So there you go. Oh, I wanted to center Maryland for just a sec real quick, Arlen, because we talked about this yesterday with Andy. So the state shark may well become the megalodon. We talked about this. This was being promoted by, I guess, many Democrats. Andy Ellis testified in favor of our Green Party choice for governor, Andy Ellis here in Maryland. He did testify in favor of the prehistoric megalodon becoming the official state shark. But Arlen, I thought Andy made a great point, which is, and I like your take, maybe you disagree. We both agree the state shark should be an existing shark, an extant shark, not one that's extinct. Wouldn't you agree?
What is the state shark right now before they change it? Do you
I'm
know?
not aware that there is a state shark. So this will
okay.
become, assuming the megalodon is in fact voted to become the shark, it will be the first and state shark in Maryland history.
Well, if you ask about 1 million people in Maryland what a megalodon is, they won't have any idea, all but maybe one scientist somewhere will understand that. But it is rather odd, I think.
Well, the thing is, wouldn't you want a shark that actually lurks in Maryland waters? We have this enormous estuary. You have the Monterey Bay. We have the Chesapeake Bay. Okay, so Monterey, Chesapeake. And our bay, I think, is a lot cooler of a bay than yours because your bay, and I live there, it's kind of just sort of a little semicircle and it's wide open to the ocean. Whereas the Chesapeake Bay is mostly inland, right? I mean, it's definitely open to the ocean, but it's relatively small mouth and a very large body of water that's quite a distance actually from the ocean. And there are sharks in there. They're not freshwater sharks, they're brackish water sharks. So I would love to see one of them become the official state shark, not a prehistoric beast we haven't seen in millions of years.
By the way, I haven't looked, but does California have a state shark? If they do, I'm not aware of it. I
would guess it's the great white. If there is one, you have them off your coasts. I would assume that would be the. Do you remember? Well, you probably do remember. We had a host, Sheila Gale, and I believe she was not attacked by a shark, but she was off the coast in Marina, I believe, snorkeling. And I believe she ran into someone. She may herself have been attacked by a shark. I'm looking that up. There are periodic shark attacks every year. Several people saved by dolphins. This is the story she did on her program. I think she wrote about it, or she certainly helped promote the story of Todd Endress, who was saved by dolphins. He had been attacked by a shark, and the dolphin saved him.
I don't remember that, but that sounds like a great story.
I knew there was a connection somehow to Sheila Gale, Sharks, and Monterey Bay. Arlen with us, so maybe we get to radio. I just had one more point, though, and I know this will irritate you as well about the Maryland. It's not a big deal. Like, you want to make the Megalodon the state shark. I don't like it because it's no longer there, but okay. But this is frustrating. It's not really an important bill whether you have a state shark or not. I mean, I guess for tourism purposes and the like. But for democracy, it would be really nice to have ranked choice voting. It certainly helped get Zoran Mamdani the credibility he needed, winning a majority of votes in the Democratic primary by virtue of ranked choice voting. Maryland passing along the shark bill, however, holding up in committee a bill to make ranked choice voting legal, not required, but to allow jurisdictions that want to employ it to do so.
Well, who's for it and who's against it? Ranked choice voting, because I don't know what's so bad about it.
You know how ranked choice voting works, where people list rather than just vote for one candidate in each race. You list in order who you like, and they've used it. It's been used. I believe it's being used in San Francisco, for example.
Yeah,
other places in
I've
California.
heard of it being used elsewhere. Sure.
So as far as we know, no one's really come out against ranked choice voting. The committee chairs in Maryland have tremendous power in the legislature, and they basically decide what bills will make it out of committee and therefore be voted on by the full House. So we have two houses, just like Congress. We have the House of Delegates, which is akin to the House of Representatives in Washington, and I don't know what is it called in Maryland. In California, I think they're called the House of Delegates, also, right?
No, the assembly. There's an assembly and a Senate, Senate.
That's right, state assemblies. So Bill Monning started out as an assembly member, and then he was voted to Senate, and he became the Senate Majority Leader, actually, which is pretty cool. Pretty darn cool that Bill made it up that high. But the way it works in Maryland is if a bill is introduced into the House of Delegates, it has to make it out of committee, which the committee chair basically decides. If it makes it out of committee, then the entire House votes on it, and then it's passed to the other House. So if the House of Delegates passes a bill, it goes to the Senate. Then the Senate votes. But the committee chair can just bottle it up, say, we're not voting. It'll never pass. I'm not going to pass it through. And what we believe on the left here is that the Democratic Party has zero interest in ranked choice voting, but they don't want to come out against it. So they just bottle it up in committees.
There's another thing we should consider, and that is, the Constitution is very clear that the states make up the rules for voting, and that's always been that way. But now I see the Supreme Court is weighing in, and they're apparently going to make the decision that the voting has to be cut off on election day, and if you have a mail-in ballot and it's a few days late, it can't be counted. I mean, there's. In other words, the federal government is kind of inserting themselves a little bit into the state rules. So that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, well, it's very unfortunate. The Supreme Court is clearly a partisan branch of government. The theory was that it would be independent. You have lifetime membership, so you never have to worry about offending a president, offending Congress. You're free to vote your conscience. But what we're seeing over and over is these justices tend to vote the way the president who appointed them wants, especially on the right, and especially with Trump. We've seen tremendous loyalty, if you want to use that term, to him by some. Although he didn't, to be fair on that score, the worst justices, the most hyper-partisan, Thomas and Alito, were not nominated by Trump. And Trump's justices, I'm not saying they're anything special, but Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Coney Barrett have been shown some independence, remarkably, from the executive branch.
Yeah, of course, once Trump appoints somebody, he doesn't have any control over how they vote. And, there have been some justices that have surprised people, and especially the president who appointed them. So, yeah, it's all hard to know. But I think basically it doesn't really matter uh, who appointed the judge. It's more like, how far right or how far left they are, because, for the Republicans, it's the Federalist Society that gives recommendations on that. And, if somebody gets through them, then, they're pretty darn right wing. And that's, there are exceptions, like you said, occasional bills like the one Amy Coney Barrett may have, and John Roberts may have gone a little bit differently than some of the other right wingers. It's just hard to predict for sure about any of those judges.
Well, Souter proved to be one of the most liberal justices, and he was appointed by H.W. Bush. So you can't always get it right, but as they see it, what's right. But the process has become very tight now, and the presidents are very, very careful not to offend their backers. They really want to be sure that who they appoint is going to stay close on the issues. It's it's just, again, not really democracy, Arlen, not even close.
Well, the funny thing is, the Supreme Court has become, of course, very partisan in the probably since the 2000 election, when you had Gore against Bush, and that turned out to be very important.
It was a terrible, terrible decision. It was one of the worst. It's totally inexcusable what they did. And you mentioned that the Constitution really does provide for local control over elections. The state of Florida made a decision it was going to recount, and the Supreme Court stopped that. That was an incredibly anti-democratic vote, anti-democracy vote.
Well, I think also what's interesting is that prior to that, election, the court didn't seem to be as partisan. People weren't so interested whether they were pro-Democrat, pro-Republican, pro-liberal, pro-conservative. At least I don't think, but it's become extra, partisan, in the last couple of decades. And that's how we look at the court now, conservative or Republican versus liberal or Democrat. And that's not the way the Supreme Court is supposed to work.
Well, I'm with you there, Arlen. I'm just looking at my hair stick. And I want to just say, folks, I did try to comb my hair before the program, but it's just totally, this tells me I've got to get a haircut. The problem is there's a lot of gray in there, and the gray hairs are stiffer and they're not as, flexible as the brown, and they go off in different directions. It's very frustrating. I don't like to use the gel. I probably should have used the gel, but we'll see what happens on that score, Arlen. Or I could just wear a hat. I know you wear the hat sometimes. Some of my guests do that.
That solves a lot of problems. I don't have to worry about how messed up my hair is.
I don't do that. I don't like the feel. I just don't like having a cap on my head. I don't know. I don't.
Yeah. Well,
never like the hat. That's just personal preference.
You just have to worry about combing your hair. That's all. How about Brill cream or something like that? I don't know.
Well, I don't like that sticky stuff either. I don't know. I have all sorts of issues here. Arlen, it's must be another 5 years that passed, because radio station KSCO up in Santa Cruz, not too far from you, is again for sale. And when I say 5 years, I actually should say 4, because this is a brand new story, but there was one almost identical reported 4 years ago. We're going to talk about it. It does look very serious, though, Arlen. Of course, they were a competitor of mine. I have my issues, obviously, politically. It's Republican. They were one of the first stations to play Limbaugh. They had Savage, pretty
even
unpleasant
Alex Jones.
sorts. Alex Jones.
Yeah, Alex Jones even. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty low.
But to give the guy credit, the owner, he does have some local. He still has some local. I think there's something lost. I hate, it's so partisan. If we had liberal left-wing radio, like when Carricksay was there, I'd say, okay, it's good to have, you don't want to lose a radio station. I mean, what's your sense? Are these local stations that may promote a conspiratorial right-wing view, but do provide voices in the community? Are they good, bad, indifferent? What's your takeaway on that, Arlen?
Well, there's trends going on in this country, obviously, of what people are listening to, what people are watching, and we're obviously changing. It's no longer radio, certainly not AM radio. So you have to go to the whatever's trending at the moment, which right now is podcasts and certain social media outlets, many of whom I don't know about, but there are some that are very right wing and some that are not. And it's just not the time for AM radio like it used to be. And that ship has sailed.
A quick shout out to our buddies in the chat, CP and Ken. Great to see you folks, and we really appreciate you and hope to see more folks as well. Don't forget, now that I'm on this jag of thanking people, if you got a chance and you haven't yet done so, and I'm sure they have, but others who haven't, please do subscribe if you haven't yet done so. It helps us obviously cut through the algorithm, which everyone is saying, but the algorithm does often prevent the program from getting out to as many people. That's why I use that 3-panel, that tripartite thumbnail. Hopefully that will make a difference.
Oh, yeah,
it's interesting, Arlen, the way, now see, this is why I've talked to a couple of people up in the Monterey Bay, or out in the Monterey Bay area, I should say, about this sale, who are familiar with the station. One longtime friend of Halitics, longtime friend of KRXA, Billy Sunshine, longtime friend of Arlen, saying, yeah, this probably won't sell. The article from KSBW, it reads like a real estate, right? Like a real estate brochure. The property includes several amenities such as a lagoon and crashing surf, which Zorling calls
nothing to do with the radio, right?
Nothing to do with radio. But if you sell the property, that's where the tower is. I don't know how you'd have to have a carve out to keep the tower from being part of it. The building is really nice for radio. I've never been inside of it, but let's face it. I mean, the cash flow is negative. I mean, they're losing money. Nobody can make money in radio. Here in Washington, D.C., the most profitable station in the country many years has been the CBS affiliate, and they are cutting staff like crazy because the revenues just don't justify a large radio staff, WTOP here in DC area. So it's really sad. I think something is lost. There was a sense of community that Zorling, for all his faults, really did foster, and I give him credit for that.
Yeah, that's true. Billy Sunshine was on KSCO, so you got to give MZ credit for that. I mean, Billy did a good, although it's kind of interesting that, Billy would say something controversial and he'd be banned for a couple of weeks. Then he'd come back and then he'd say something else controversial and be banned. He'd come back. So it was kind of amusing in a way.
Well, he is somewhat of a challenging host. Let's put it that way. If you're listening, Billy, we love you. Please call in 240-242-5646. Apparently the asking price is $8 million, which is an awful lot so that you can lose money. Now the appeal is you might be able to build condos, right? There is what they call a somewhat obstructed ocean view. So you build 10, 15 condos, you double your money. But the problem is you got to get approved. I'm sure that it's very expensive to build there. And then you've got those towers. So this may not sell. It may just continue as it's been going for umpteen years, Arlen.
Well, it says here in the article that Zorling is 74, so he's probably wants to wind down and do something else. His mother died a few years ago, and I think that was really important. She had a big presence on that station and getting it started and keeping it going, and then they were very close, and then she passed away. So that all I think fits into what's happening. He's losing interest and probably losing money.
By the way, kind words in there from, I think it's Ken. Hosts like hell get their material suppressed for telling too much truth. I wonder, I don't like to blame the algorithm too much because I feel like, well, it's making excuses. If I was a better host, if I was more compelling, or I did a better job promoting, perhaps the Halitics would have blown up by now. There's certain things I could do differently, but man, the thing I can't stand on all that video editing is just a remarkable time eater, and I just need to buy a super fast computer that would make things faster. Here's why I'm not. Here's another. If you want to throw cold water on the theory that KSCO is going to sell, look at this. Is the end near for local radio at Santa Cruz's KSCO? From Lookout, you see the exact. I think that's the exact same picture as in the KSBW article, Dateline March 26, 2026. Look at the date of this article, though, Arlen, just in case you can. I'll make it a little bigger.
Okay.
So over 4 years ago, well, almost 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So they've been trying to sell for a while. But I think it's going to happen because you've got a broker involved. Brokers are going to do what move heaven and earth to get their commission. And I just think the radio industry now is at a point where it just really can't even hold on, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and so that's the big question: is if he does sell it, will it continue to be a radio station? And I think we both could agree, probably not, because there's just no money in it, and they're going to probably find some other use for KSCW and their very nice property.
Well, I think that's right, and I think it's also unfortunate. But radio had a nice run over 100 years in this country, but I guess once I entered the business, that was the death knell for it, is my guess.
It's all your fault.
It certainly makes sense. And one more story here on local radio, and really, this is actually much, in my view, worse news than an older station owner deciding to get out of the business, decision he's been making for 10, 15, 20 years. This is really brings back some nostalgia for me, Arlen. CBS News Radio shut down after nearly a century of broadcasting. CBS News Radio really was a great friend of the independent radio station operator. I mean, we aired CBS News Radio at no charge, and you get this incredibly professional quality, totally professional quality service that you can air. Now, I think they do charge some people, and there were some issues, but with us, they just said, you can just put it up there, just play our ads, which of course we did.
Yeah.
Although there were a couple of times Coach would cut it off at the 5-minute mark. One played the 6, and I'd have to yell at him for it. I wanted to get started early. And I'm like, no. If they catch us, then I'm in trouble. You're not in trouble. I'm in trouble. So, there you go.
I don't think CBS was looking real closely at how many commercials
I don't
aired.
think they were, but I had to certify we played the ads every month. And, if I knew we hadn't, it gave me a twinge of guilt certifying we did. 700 affiliated stations. So really, the CBS News Radio really did a lot for radio. And, now they're gone. They're about to go. And this is going to be just one more nail in the coffin.
Yeah, there's so many changes going on in communication and news and news sources and all that. It moves along so fast, and I think even more scary for me is there's talk about is it Larry Ellison, who's a good friend of Donald Trump, apparently on the verge of buying CNN, which would, as far as the way I look at it, that would lead just MS Now being the only liberal station, on TV for news talk.
Well, let's address that in a second, Arlen, but I just wanted to also just throw out there from Ken, again, radio has been dying for a couple of decades now. It's true. It really has been. I mean, it sounds like, in The Godfather, there's a joke about Hyman Roth. He's been dying of the same heart attack for 20 years, he's really not dying, he just says he's dying. But in this case, radio has been on a steady downward trajectory. I don't know if it's 20 years, but I would say a solid 15. I would, really our high water mark at KRXA was 2007, 2008. And then you had the financial crash, and we never recovered from that. A lot of small businesses, local businesses that were advertisers, either cut their budgets drastically, or sometimes they even went out of business. And I really think that hurt local radio. It wasn't just our experience, but many others. You saw Air America start to really shed affiliates at that point. And radio station valuations really started to plummet as well. So I would say that was a point where others who were ahead of the curve would have said, yeah, the internet's going to kill radio. You might have said that, but it began to really become evident in terms of revenues, at least from my perspective, at when we had the financial crash in 2008.
Yeah, there's so many. The technology is changing things in so many ways and so quickly, it's really hard to keep up with. And, there's a lot of things going on that you and I probably are not aware of when it comes to, podcasters and all that are, influential maybe to young people. So, it just keeps changing. But I think those who have money, can make their opinions and their ownership of, news quite more influential, I think. So I wish there were some Democrats, some liberals that were willing to put money into media, but I don't see them as much as some of these right-wing politicians.
Well, Tom
owners.
Hartman always used to argue that Democrats and progressives needed to put their money in media, and they never really did, except for me. But in and Air America, Drobnys, and people like that. But in retrospect, I probably should have tried to build up a podcast. That said, the dream would be a 24/7 radio station that is consistently promoting a truly left message. And that's what I wanted. That was the goal. And we got there for a little bit, but it's tough because so much revenues do come from fellow travelers, people who support your message. A big reason Rush Limbaugh was able to become so big is he got a lot of revenue from small businesses that really, really loved his anti-tax message and his deregulatory message. And what we promoted at KRXA 540 was not a message that a lot of small business people found, and certainly no big business people. Some small businesses may have agreed, but big businesses hated what we had to say. So
I sort of had the impression, that these right-wing radio stations were subsidized for a while until they did make money, like Fox News too. It was losing money at the beginning, but, if the owners are, really serious enough and want to keep it going, they're going to find the money to make it keep going, where I don't see that on the left, like you're talking about, Tom Hartman was saying, we need more rich liberals that are,
I think Tom Hartman should have bought radio stations. I actually wrote an article calling on him to do it, and he responded, but he didn't respond to my argument. He just said, I'm going to focus on production. Fine, but you could produce and you could also buy a station, but he never addressed that. Maybe he just didn't have the money, but.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You have to have the money. I doubt that Tom Hartman has made a tremendous amount of money, so he's not going to be buying radio stations.
You know what, Arlen? You could buy radio stations at that time period for well under $1 million. Now you can buy them for even less. I cannot believe this guy had written so many books. His radio station, his radio show was very popular at that point, or certainly we had on a lot of affiliates. Even if he didn't have the money in his pocket, he could have gone to his buddies, Stephanie Miller, and she had money, right? Her father was a big shot corporate lawyer. And as she never tires of telling us, ran for vice president with Barry Goldwater. So, there are people with money.
Yeah, Stephanie Miller, she's still around, and that's pretty cool, especially when she has such a big staff. She has so many other people that she works with. So, she's got to run a lot of commercials to pay for the station, I would imagine. I don't think she makes money off it.
No, I doubt she makes much money, although I think she made money on her Sexy Liberal tour. But regardless, she could have bought a station. She never did.
Well,
240
stations. It doesn't matter anymore because radio stations are out.
That's true. All right, Arlen, let's talk about the SAVE Act, which President Trump is absolutely adamant Republicans have to pass. He's not going to sign any bills unless you pass this Save America Act. You want to talk about it, so you talk about it.
Well, with Donald Trump, he's aware of how people are thinking. He can see the opinion polls, he can watch the news channels, and he must realize that a lot of people don't like what he's doing, that he's not doing that great. So and looking at the elections, the off-year elections, the Democrats have won just about every single one of them. So he's got to be worried about midterm elections in which, now that Republicans control the House and the Senate, after the next elections in November, they may not. It may be the Democrats to take both houses. So he's not going to watch that happen without doing something about it. And so he's trying to change the rules, have more control from the federal government. And, he's going to do whatever it takes because he's not going to allow himself to be beaten, in an election.
Well, he hates to be a loser. He's never wants to be a loser. And he knows that if he loses this election, everyone's going to call him a loser. So here's from the New York Times.
Excuse me a second, but I don't know, because he's got this thing where, he really has won every election.
That's true.
A lot of people
he'll
believe
always
what
say
he says.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
So I don't know if it makes a difference if, no matter what happens, he's going to say he won and it was rigged. That's just the way it is.
But John, this is just my cards are always on the table. I think it's a totally unnecessary bill. It's solving a non-existent problem. There's people who are voting are eligible to vote. People who are voting are registered to vote. There's not only no evidence that so-called, quote, illegals, unquote, are voting. In fact, the evidence is that they're not voting. We know they're not voting. So, I mean, even when there have been people who have been identified, well, what about this person? And there is some question. Generally, it's because they have the same name as somebody who is not eligible to vote. But it turns out that this person is eligible to vote. So maybe there have been 1 or 2 or 3 examples of somebody who really, really wasn't allowed illegal, who wasn't really legally voting, who did, out of hundreds of millions of votes. So it's a totally non-existent problem. But one thing that the right wing always points out, well, who cares? All right, well, it isn't a non-existent. You're wrong. Trump would have won if it weren't for all those illegals. That's the only reason. Democrats shipped them in to vote. And they created all these fake ballots, mail-in, which it's all lies. It's all lies. But the argument that is hard, I think, to refute, and like your response is, well, all we're saying is you got to have a photo ID. Everyone has a photo ID. If you're not trying to hide something, then why are you against this bill?
Well, photo ID is one thing, but there's a lot of other things that are put into these bills that have, that are far worse and are part of the bill. So, you got to be real careful. Photo ID, that's reasonable. But, if you need a passport, that's more trouble. If you need your birth certificate, that's more trouble. And if they have other rules that don't even apply to voting that are part of the bill, then, you got problems.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the point, right? I mean, most people do not carry birth certificates. Also, what does a birth certificate prove? I mean, it just, it's when you were born. It doesn't, like, let's say it says you have blue eyes. Lots of people's eyes change color. I don't even know if birth certificates have eye color. But lots of people's eye color changes as they get older. So there's really nothing. You don't have hair when you're born usually, and if you do, it's not going to likely be the color it'll be when you're 25 years old. But there you see, fraudulent voting by non-citizens is extremely rare. No evidence to support Trump's BS charges. He probably, in a way, believes it because it justifies or explains. Like you said, he always wins. So he only lost because of all those people who weren't qualified to vote. He has to tell himself that so he can sleep at night, I guess. But Arlen, just to point out, this is from the New York Times. Apparently 9% of eligible voters don't have the necessary documentation, at least right in their hands. They have to write away for it to get a birth certificate. It's not always so easy to get. Many people they're never going to leave the country. They don't have the money to leave the country. They don't have a passport. Most states don't have the real ID driver's licenses, which I do, California and Maryland, but most states don't. So it is a hardship. It is an impediment to people.
And they're also trying to get rid of voting by mail, absentee voting, which is really important for people who, that have disabilities, or can't get to the polls. And then when you think about people who are away from their home and they want to do absentee ballots. Donald Trump himself does absentee, but he doesn't want anybody else to it. It's crazy. There's a problem here that doesn't exist, like you say, and they're trying to, change things so that will, in some way or another, give them an advantage.
But here's my question to you, Arlen. Would this really confer an advantage on Republicans? And let me make the case that it would not. My understanding, could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, is the average Hillary Clinton voter in 2016 was more affluent than the average Trump voter. Now, people who have passports tend to be, not always, of course, I don't want to be generalized too much, but my suspicion is that people who have passports tend to meet the definition of the typical Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris voter. Relatively well educated with a college degree or maybe an advanced degree, with a pretty solid government job or professional job. They're not millionaires, or they're not billionaires anyway. They're certainly not multimillionaires, but they have some money in the bank. They do travel at a minimum, maybe go to Canada, Mexico, something of that sort. So it seems to me they're more likely, in other words, that type of Democratic voter is more likely to have the necessary documentation than, say, the blue-collar, working-class Trump voter, many of whom were Latino American, some African American men. I'm not sure that the Trump voter is more likely to meet the requirements off, the bat than the average Democratic voter. Your response?
Yeah, I just don't know if that stuff should matter at all. We shouldn't be thinking in those terms. Voting, it has gone on very well over these, the history of this country. In 2020, they examined everything and said that the voting was probably about as accurate as it's ever been.
Yeah.
And there were no problems. And all of a sudden, Trump says, no, it's a scam. And, I won and not the Democrats. And then his people, since he so strongly he talks about things like that, they believed him. Then you end up with something like January 6th, was it? That people stormed the Capitol thinking that he was robbed of the election, when all the evidence and from objective sources was saying he did lose. So and now, today, I think most Republicans would say he really won the 2020 election.
They can't admit it. They can't admit it, or they risk losing. But that said, and I agree with you, Arlen, that the goal here is to prevent people from voting. But ultimately, I think the motive is for Trump is to maximize the likelihood that his voters will vote while reducing the likelihood the Democratic voters will vote.
Sure.
And I'm not sure he's going to get there. Now, I'm not sure that this bill is tailored to accomplish that. Now, there's a good point, I believe, Ken says it shouldn't cost money to vote. Of course, we agree with that. But he also says they don't want poor people to vote either. And I think that's really what it boils down to. Working class, blue collar type voters who have leaned towards Trump in recent years are certainly far more likely to have the identification than homeless people who are very poor. And poor people do vote Democratic. It's true. Working class people vote Republican. Poor people tend to vote Democratic. And I think that this is tailored to try to reduce the likelihood that poor people vote. All that said, I stand by my initial conclusion, which is this bill may not help Trump the way he thinks it will.
Well, yeah, because right now, Trump, the Republicans are in bad shape. You just look at the opinion polls and how people, think of the administration now. And yeah, they're certainly coming at it from a disadvantage. And if they change the rules, it could possibly hurt them even more. But they have to do something, I guess, is the feeling Trump feels, I got to do something to help increase my chances. And if this will do it, that's fine. And a lot of the Republican states are agreeing with him and are trying to, work along with him. So it's, voting should not be like this in this country. We're supposed to have free and fair elections. And apparently it's a challenge.
All right, it's an Arlen Tuesday. Phone lines are open, 240-242-5646. You can see the number right there on the screen. It's always there. So we'd love to talk to you if you have a question, comment, concern, especially somebody who maybe is friends with Arlen, wants to, take issue with something he said or a number of things that he said. Please feel free to call in. If you want to agree with me, you should call in. If you don't agree with me, then, I don't have to call. All right, 240-242.
All the people that don't agree with you, there should be a lot more, and they should be calling. I don't understand why they
probably should. I'm good with disagreement. I really am. Arlen, your favorite, Nick Kristof, your favorite. I'm going to just state it right there. Would you say he does, in your view, is he a notch above everyone else, a notch above Friedman, above maybe Edsall? What about the old Paul Krugman's gone, but if the pantheon of New York Times opinion writers, which I personally don't think is that great, a pantheon, right? I mean, it's no Cooperstown, it's no Ruth Mantle Robinson, but okay, whatever, Koufax, but whatever. In the pantheon of New York Times op-ed writers, who's your favorite of all? And give us 2 and 3 as well.
You're right. Nick Kristof is probably my favorite. I think he's the most consistent and he knows what's important. But there are other good ones that I like. Tom Friedman is one of them. He's got tremendous experience and knowledge, and I like to hear what he has to say. And there's others that I like. They don't have any really right-wing ones that I bore, but there are some conservative writers.
I would say Brett Stevens is pretty far to the right, Arlen. Brett Stevens is right out there. And there's another one too. I forget his name, who's very pro-war, very pro-Zionist, very pro-Israel. I forget. It's Stevens, and there's one other. This is what I would say about that cohort. I don't think there's any leftist. There's not one columnist, I could be wrong, who's come out and said that our support for Israel is wrong. Even though most Democrats believe that. And a plurality of Americans, or it's 50-50 now, are more pro-Palestine than pro-Israel. And yet I don't think I could be wrong. I haven't read one opinion piece by a New York Times regular that's come out against Israel. Now, am I wrong is that fair?
Well, you know who my favorite columnists and writers are, Kristof and Hartman and Robert Reich and a couple others, but I don't know, who are your favorites, Hal? Do you have
before I get there, I just want to say, I think that the New York Times deserves its readers because it doesn't really provide a wide spectrum of views. It goes from center left with limits, right? You can only be so far to the left to pretty hard right. And they are invariably militarist. They're very rarely flat out against military action by the United States, and certainly support by Israel. And there was no one, as far as I can tell, there was not even a pro-Mamdani voice on the opinion page, even though he won. I think the New York Times just doesn't reflect its opinion page its opinion writers fall within a pretty narrow spectrum. That's it. I do think on occasions, Kristof does a good job. I thought Friedman's column that we may get to or may not, because time is running short, is pretty spot on. I have issues with it, but pretty spot on. Who are my favorite opinion writers? That's a really good question, Arlen. I haven't really given that too much thought. Usually I hate them all. I don't know. There's very rare that I see. There was a guy, who I used to really like? Glenn Ford, who wrote for Black Agenda Report, not Glenn Ford, the actor, and I used to interview him on the old KRXA. I thought he did a pretty good job. I pretty much like Glenn Ford, but very, very poorly known outside of left-wing circles.
And by the way, when you talk about the New York Times, I mean, they may have some problems with their opinion pages, not, spread out as much as you would like, but I think it's more important that they're objective in their news, the actual objective news that they put on the front page and throughout their newspaper. And I think they do a pretty good job of, putting down, displaying what is important and what isn't. And I don't see it as being particularly biased. I think their news is about as good as, any newspaper can be for a national newspaper.
Well, international, really. I mean, it's the most influential paper in the world by probably a long, long way. I don't want to be too hard on the paper. It's incredible what they do every single day, churning out all those stories, and they're probably the most reliable of any news outlet. But again, I think that they cater to their advertisers. They cater to a certain audience, and there's a lot of important stories that they don't get to, they don't cover. So,
Well, I don't know. Could you name one? I don't know what they don't cover. They seem to cover anything that's in
I
the
think
news that's important.
they've really failed to set out, and you can always argue, you can always point differently. They've done coverage. I think that their coverage of the Israeli genocide in Gaza has been inadequate. I think they failed to convey the true horror of what Israel's done. That said, they've conveyed it to a degree. I mean, it's not terrible. It's better than other papers, but I don't think it's been good enough. Everyone always points to the run up to the war in Iraq, how they stovepiped, Dick Cheney through Liz Cheney, through what's her name? Miller? Judith Miller just reported. She stenographed. Now, that's a long, long time ago. So, I'm going to hedge back. I haven't been reading the paper. I think it's fair for you to point out that it's the opinion page that refuses to provide support for Mamdani, but I think they also tend to report negatively on him as much as they can. And I don't like that. There were some stories that came out about him that I thought were pretty gratuitous. They don't cover green candidates. They don't really cover alternatives to the corporate media, corporate parties, in my opinion, well enough.
Yeah. They can't do all things for all people. There's only one major newspaper. They used to compete with the Washington Post, but now that Bezos has pretty much, cut so much out of the Post, that Post is not even an equal, news leader like the New York Times is. They're basically by themselves. They're the only really national paper that the average person will go to. Although the Wall Street Journal has a lot of readers too, and they have some good opinions lately. A lot of their editorials have been very good against some of the things that Trump has been doing, and I'm sure he doesn't like that. So, yeah.
I mean, I don't want to be too hard on the saw You asked me where I saw shortcomings. I think the biggest are in the editorial pages, but I think they're also the reportage is somewhat limited. But I'm not going to, I don't want to spend too much time bashing it, except on upon that specific articles. So this is a good piece. Look, again, there's a lot of value there. There's a lot you can take away of real value. I thought this was a really good piece that you cited too. Look at that cost, $1.3 million a minute war, 78. If I do my math right, that's $78 million an hour. So we're spending $78 million an hour times 24, 1.5. What is it? So $1.5 billion a day, if I did the math right. Put that in your calculator. There's 60 seconds in a minute, or 60 minutes in an hour times 24. So that's 1440. 1.3 million times 1440 is going to be over $1.5 billion a day. Isn't that incredible? That what we're spending on this thing.
I'm not going to get my calculator out and try to figure things out like you do.
I know I'm right. I did get that right. Yeah. I'm pretty sure once I did it by the minute times the number of minutes in a day. I'm pretty sure that's right. It's close to $2 billion a day.
Yeah, it's crazy.
For what purpose? What's the end game here?
Nobody really knows for sure. And the nice thing about what Christoph was writing, he actually put the numbers down. For $75 million is about an hour's worth of war. And maybe all told, the Iran war could cost, somebody was saying, more than $1 trillion. And so, there's so much more we could do with that money, but we're wasting it, overseas and not accomplishing anything. It's very sad.
Well, we're making things worse, right? We're making things actually worse. We're creating more people who hate our country.
Yeah.
We are destabilizing a country that if we do somehow topple the regime, it will become another Libya. It will implode. The terrible crime, suffering, and again, I guess the U.S. oil companies will get to, I don't know, operate. But we were buying Iranian oil anyway. It wasn't like Venezuela. Which we had Venezuelan oil also.
What's the thing? Yeah.
Horrid. It's horrific. But what's happening?
And what's
here?
the thing in the last few days that the Trump administration is giving subsidies and money to Russia and to Iran for their oil? Here we're fighting Iran and we're giving them money. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Well, we got to vote him out. We got to vote out his allies in Congress, and we've got to figure out a way to not have this happen again. Because it's horrible. It's so bad. And for us, it's not so bad. We live our lives. We're in our houses. Nobody's dropping bombs near us. We're not smelling burning bodies, but lots of people are.
Yeah, the people are having to look at the gas stations and try to fill their tank with a lot more money than they used to. And, everything is going to be going up in price just because of the lack of oil, including groceries and everything else. And, people are already stretched to the limit when it comes to their income. They barely live paycheck to paycheck, most people.
Oh, exactly correct. That money should be used to help us transition away from fossil fuels, to make sure everyone has health care. I mean, there's a million. In fact, it would save us money if we wouldn't even need it to, we had health care, we'd have more money. But no, this is just an awful, awful turn of events.
Yeah.
And, Democrats need to make that point, and I don't think they have. I mean, some have, some make good arguments, but.
Well, I think the worst thing are the Republicans, who pretty much are afraid to take on Trump. They're literally afraid of him, so they let him do whatever he wants, and they rarely criticize him. There's a couple people that'll have some differences, but mostly, they're going to go along with whatever he does, and we know that he doesn't know what he's doing. The guy's certifiably insane, I think.
But this reminds me of one thing we discussed last week when we were arguing about the perniciousness of AIPAC. And I wouldn't say you defended them exactly, but you felt that maybe I was exaggerating just how bad they are. But AIPAC is a staunch supporter of this war on Iran. And they have they have purchased Democratic legislators as well. So doesn't the blame fall on both parties? I mean, there are Democrats who are not speaking out against AIPAC either. Yeah, and against this war. I mean, and against the war, who are defending the war.
Well, there are those, but there's also a lot of them who are, criticizing the war and criticizing Trump, and that's certainly a good thing. But right now there's no, but the Republicans have all the power, so they can do pretty much whatever they want. The Democrats, unfortunately, don't have any power. They can talk, but they can't really do anything, and that's all the more reason why the elections, the midterms, are going to be so important. And if we could get to them, so that November we'll have a free and fair election, that could make a major change. But the question is, how easy will it be to have that election and vote?
All right, let's pivot real quick. I don't have a ton of time. Actually, Tuesdays is my shortest day, and we're almost at the end of the hour, but you definitely wanted to talk about this piece too. And again, I thought Christoph did a good job. Look, he made it clear. This war that Trump launched, at the behest of Netanyahu, to wag the dog, keep us from focusing on Epstein, has been disastrous on many different levels. In fact, even Israel now is suffering. Iran's missiles are getting through. Its drone attacks are getting through. More and more Israeli casualties as a result. maybe that will cause Israelis to reconsider their policies. I doubt it, but it would be nice.
I doubt it too. Yeah.
Arlen,
Netanyahu's got so much power.
Well, he has power because they vote for him. I mean, the voters don't have to vote for him. They could vote for somebody else. They choose not. They choose to keep electing him, or even worse, even further. Well, I don't think it can be worse, but equally bad right wingers like Smotrich and Ben Gvir. Once and for all means never. This is Thomas Friedman. Why did you? What jumped out at you? Which, by the way, again, I thought. Kudos to Christoph. Kudos to you for selecting Christoph's piece. And for this one, I don't always agree with Friedman. I have my issues with him, but here, I think this is a good one.
Yeah, I like to read Tom Friedman because he pretty much sums up the way things are going. He brings a lot of history into it and says, this is what's going to happen maybe in the future. But, he's saying that he's got these three rules, and one of them is the four most dangerous words in the Middle East are once and for all. So you say once and for all that Israel will do this, and another country will do that, and it just doesn't turn out that way. I put the rule up, or just to shortcut this a little bit. He's basically saying this war, the genocidal war launched against Gaza, was ostensibly to root out Hamas. Right? Hamas is this terrible threat to every Israeli. We've got to root out these murderous Hamas agents. And in fact, he makes the point Hamas is still in charge. So all the, 2+ years later, all the death, all the destruction, you've razed Gaza to the ground, you've killed 70,000+ people, and you did not accomplish your goal. Yeah, I think, these people, we may kill off several generations of their leaders, but yet, who's going to take over? That's the important issue. And we seem to think that somehow the democratic resistance and the people living in these countries will, go pro-democracy, but it doesn't happen that way. They're controlled by, a lot of the, people like Hamas, in other words, the people in Iran are not going to rebel for democracy. I think Trump may have hoped that would happen, but it's not going to happen. They're going to have basically the same leadership. They'll kill off some people, and somebody else will take over, but it'll still be anti-Israel, anti-American, and pro whatever religion, Muslim. So it's pretty tough. I mean,
do you think Trump really cares about democracy at all? I mean, you said he hopes maybe to become democratic, but it seems to me he's fine with autocrats. In fact, he prefers them as long as they're autocrats he can do business with.
Sure. Yeah, no, Trump doesn't care about democracy. He doesn't care about helping people. We know that. He's just interested only in his ego and in more power. And, that's why we end up where we are. He's not a good leader. He doesn't really know what he's doing. He doesn't have enough knowledge or information or, integrity.
Or concern. Or humanity. Rule number 2, I just put it on screen here. Never drink your neighbor's whole milkshake. He's basically, don't embarrass, don't shame people, don't try to humiliate them. You're only going to make them angrier, and in the end, you'll get the blowback. We certainly saw in the wake of World War II with the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine, the goal there to help the countries that were flat on their back as a result of World War II. We helped them out, and we built strong alliances throughout Europe, and including Germany, right? We helped rebuild Germany, and it became a democracy, which it had been before the war. What Friedman is saying is that's what we should do in the Middle East too, is try to help these countries, try to make them better places, safer, more secure. Now, I don't know whether that was even tried in Iran. in Iraq. Iraq didn't turn out so well. Neither did Libya. Libya turned out even worse. We toppled those countries. It was very different. In the wake of aftermath of World War II, we were rightly viewed by Europe as liberators, but we are the ones who destroyed those countries. So I don't know that we could even plausibly be perceived as helping the people there. But to the extent we could, I don't think we've done it. We need a completely different foreign policy, Arlen. We need to go back to the Carter Doctrine, which was trying to promote democracy, trying to work with countries to make life better for their people, not to destroy them from within.
I think, I think we'd be pretty certain that the reason that we're fighting in Iran and the Middle East is not to have democracy. Mostly it's because Trump wants more credit, more power. He doesn't care about how the people are doing. He just wants more for himself, and that's why we're in the jam we're in now, because there's doesn't seem to be any way to win in this kind of situation.
Well, can you even impose democracy at the point of a gun? Like, let's look at a country like Saudi Arabia, which is a close ally, right? Trump's good buddies with the royal house of Saud, but it's a tyrannical regime. It's autocratic. They do a lot of really bad things there, just like we do here. Let's say that there was a good president who really cared about the people of Saudi Arabia, really wanted things to be better there. Would it make sense in those circumstances, in your view, to invade Saudi Arabia, depose their leaders, and impose pro-democracy government and hold regular elections? Would that be the right move? I used to, by the way, I wanted to say, I used to think it would be. I used to think we should do that.
Well, we can't impose democracy on anybody. We can't tell them how they should, believe in how they should run their government. Just like if we go into Cuba, I don't know what's going to happen there. I don't think they're going to rise up in our favor. They'll probably be anti-American. But what I said last week, Hal, was I think the reason we started this war is only because Trump was scared of what the Epstein reports would say about him, and he was afraid they might. They were getting pretty close to having good evidence. And I think he probably said, I got to do something, so I'm going to distract people with this war. And because it looks to me like everybody in his government didn't really understand what was going on. They all had different reasons. They struggled to explain it. And sure enough, it's obviously wasn't planned very well.
It certainly was one of the functions of that invasion, the bombing attacks on Iran was to distract. Although some reports say that Trump and Netanyahu had already planned this out some months in advance, and even before the Epstein files dropped, that this was in the works. So we don't know, but given the timing, it looks awfully likely that a major factor in Trump's decision was to distract us from his complicity in the sex trafficking, and perhaps his involvement as a purchaser of underage girls. So final rule, let's just wrap it up if we can, Arlen. The power of the strong and the power of the weak are more equal than you think. I like this rule. I thought all the rules were good. You want to comment on that real quick? I have some thoughts, but you go first if you have anything.
Well, I think all they're saying is you just never know who's really going to come out on top and who isn't, and that it's just not all that easy to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, you attack a country like Iran and you think it's going to be a cakewalk, and obviously that isn't what's happened. And even in the situation like the invasion of Gaza by Israel, where obviously, in terms of material military might, Israel is, first world, one of the most powerful armies in the world. Hamas is almost, 17th, 18th, 19th century weaponry. In the end, if you're fighting on your own land, your own turf, and your own rubble, you're going to find ways to inflict pain on those who are trying to take power over you. And things may not work out the way you like.
And it's interesting. I think people were thinking that Trump was thinking that we could get some allies and can help him, get through the Straits of Hormuz or whatever, and do all these things. But I will give credit to the other nations of the world. They did not want to go along with what he's doing. No. Nobody volunteered.
100%, and that's important. very, very important, really, for the future, I would say. All right, Arlen,
Yeah.
that's got all I got. You got a final word, anything we didn't talk about, thebigpicturereport.com. You can see, though, that's where Arlen blogs. Check it out, thebigpicturereport.com. Anything we missed or I missed that you wanted to briefly discuss?
I do want to tell you an announcement, which people probably already know, and that's Saturday. There's going to be another No Kings protest. I hope it'll be the biggest one yet, and there's every reason to indicate it will, based on what Trump is doing. So anyway, if you could make it to wherever your particular protest is, there's going to be thousands all over the country. I'll be there in Monterey.
Yeah, take some pictures, Arlen, share them. So hopefully we can discuss that on Tuesday, a week from today. And I got invited to a couple. I'm sort of trying to figure out what I'm going to be doing Saturday, but I will try. I will do my utmost to make it to a No Kings event. Arlen, thanks so much. As always, it's great to have you on. Really, I learn a lot from the stories that you refer to and also the analysis you provide. So thank you for that. And I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks to all for watching, for listening. Thank you for being part of Halitics.